So, while Fortuna is great and all, it doesn't in any way make the planes of Eidolon or the Eidolons themselves into pointless content. I mean, Zals are still amazing weapons, Revenant and Gar are solid warframes, the Kortak and Stubba are alright weapons, and of course, Arcanes are always going to be awesome. And while I admit that the planes are far from being as complex for the Rift Magician as the Orb Valis is, thanks to some interesting enemy interactions, the importance of the boss fights, and how powerful Limbo is in the normal missions, there's still more than enough interesting content here to do one of my guides on the subject. But before we talk about the mission and enemy strategies, we should talk about the builds. For missions, you can use anything. Yep, come here with whatever you like, and you can do the objectives just fine. There's no nullifiers to deal with, and the only things that can move through stasis are the Eidolons, the Bulkors, the Darkins, and the troop carriers, and there aren't really any weird issues for Limbos to worry about on any of the missions like there are on Orb Valis. So taking the minimum size defense works just fine for the missions. The closest thing to an issue is just that napalms are able to damage the defense points through Cataclysm, but unless you completely AFK, there shouldn't be any real chance of them actually destroying it. So yeah, while larger bubbles can provide their usual sorts of crowd control and have a couple of other benefits that we'll get into in a minute, if you're like me and prefer to use a small bubble and focus more on the game's gun and swordplay, that's perfectly fine. As for those bonuses for larger bubbles, they're just three very small things that are honestly more cool than incredibly useful since they're all related to the airborne enemies. And the weakest of these is tied to the Dargins, and unfortunately it used to be a lot better than it is now. You see, you used to be able to banish the Dargins, but now you can only banish the pilots themselves. Unfortunately, that means that you can no longer just go a long-range build, fire a stasis banish in a Dargin's general direction, and get the ships to freeze without really needing to aim at all. Even though the pilots can get sent to the rift like this, stasis won't activate on them until they leave the Dargin, so yeah, that trick's out the window. However, once the Dargin they're attached to dies, the pilot can be affected by stasis, so if you have the Riven challenge that requires you to hit a number of pilots before they hit the ground, you can just activate stasis, banish the pilot, kill the Dargin it's flying, and while sometimes the Dargin will take the pilot with it when it explodes, the rest of the time you will find your pilot safe and sound and in stasis floating up in the air where the ship blew up. This is probably the single easiest way to complete that particular Riven challenge, but as I said before, it's not a major thing and you certainly won't be dealing with it on a regular basis, so just it's something to keep in mind. Something that's more likely to be useful is that the larger cataclysms can work as cover against the Grineer's gunships, the Bulkors. If these are harassing your team, you can just drop a cataclysm, and as long as they stay inside it, your team won't be able to be damaged by the Bulkor no matter how much it tries to shoot you. On the other hand, depending on your gear, you have the option of either breaking their turret, dealing enough damage to force the thing to flee, or just blowing the whole ship out of the sky, so again, this is mostly a neat perk that might be helpful rather than a serious reason to go with a large bubble setup. Finally, Agma bombers can also be cataclysmed and stasis, which makes them much easier for you to deal with, but unfortunately these guys also seem to be extremely rare, and once again, like with the Bulkors, with a decent weapon you can just take them out of the air in basically no time. So I wouldn't actually call this a serious reason to pick one build over the other. Now, there is one last thing I want to say about Limbo's abilities before we move on to the bounties, and actually it's something I should have talked about with Fortuna. While K-drives don't disable anything, swapping to your Arcwing will cancel Riftwalk, Stasis, and Cataclysm, but it won't end Banish or Rift Surge. This is a pretty small thing, and unlikely to ever be really all that useful, but it is worth mentioning, and if you like Arcwing, you can just banish the drones and NPCs on the 2 escort-style missions, and then have them walk to their extraction while you float around above them. As for the Cetus bounties themselves, they're incredibly quick to talk about, because unfortunately they don't have a lot of strategy unique to them. Even if you count the missions from Ghoul Purge and Plague Star events, there's just not a whole lot of variation here in what's actually required for the missions. This doesn't mean that Limbo's weak here in any sense, but yeah, there's not going to be much that's surprising about the missions here. On the drone escort mission, just banish it and walk it to wherever it's going. As long as you remember to stay within 50 meters, the thing will eventually get to its extraction point without ever taking damage. Basically the same story with the rescue missions, just nuke down the guards, hack the bomb thingy, then banish the NPC and take him to wherever he's going. The only difference here is that after the rescue, he follows you and that the point's likely to be much closer. As for the various stationary defenses, they are all also about as simplistic as it gets. Just drop a stasis cataclysm on the defense point and refresh your abilities from time to time. As long as your bubble stasis and on the point, and you remember to kill any napalms if you're using a small bubble build, you shouldn't have any issues whatsoever with this. And the last mission that Limbo does something unique on is capture, which you make even more trivial than usual thanks to just being able to slide into the rift and capture the enemy from another dimension. Nothing surprising here, it's just capture as usual. As for what's left, it's just the zone defenses where you need to kill everything, the assassination missions where you kill everything and then kill one specific thing, the supply crate missions where you kill everything until a crate drops and then repeat that strategy 2 more times, and the supply crate missions where you run around in an area and listen for the sound that the caches make. Yeah, like I said, there's not a lot of complexity to these bounties. Limbo does them all very well, but the strategies used for them aren't particularly strange, and so I don't really have much that I can actually say about them. However, that lack of meaningful things to say only applies to the daytime missions, as the Eidolon hunts themselves do deserve a bit more of an in-depth talk. While Limbo is definitely not the best frame for them, there are 2 helpful things that he can do when fighting the Eidolons. First, he can banish the lures. This renders them effectively indestructible, but does not stop their ability to capture the Eidolon or to absorb Bombulus. Adding more duration in can be really helpful, as just prime continuity and narrow-minded are enough to make it so that you'll probably only ever need to cast Banish once every limb or 2, even if you're attempting to solo the Eidolons. Haven might also be worth considering here, as it'll give the lures and anyone you accidentally banish a decent chunk of their health back, but the effect will be relatively weak without power strength, and the lures shouldn't ever take all that much damage unless you just completely forget to keep them banished for a bit. As for the other major thing you could try to do, it's just that whenever you destroy a limb and the boss prepares his energy spike, drop a cataclysm down and tell your teammates to go hide in it. This will keep their warframes safe and immune to the magnetic proc, allowing them to keep all of their energy up between each of the Eidolon's phases. Larger bubbles can help here, especially if your team isn't well coordinated, but as long as you have a cataclysm down at all, your teammates should have time to either get inside it or get too far away from the Eidolon to actually have an issue with it. Just remember that while operators can hit the boss through Cataclysm without issue, the Eidolon itself isn't sent to the rift, so you'll still need to drop your bubble before the boss's shield goes down so that your team can target its other limbs. Now, all of that is stuff that I've already said in my earlier videos, but I do have a few extra tips to add in here. Starting with the fact that even though you should be placing down a Cataclysm or at least slipping into the rift whenever an Eidolon uses its energy spike, if you are a Madurai user, you should not forget to go into your operator and charge up your Void Strike while the boss is blasting everything. This is a pretty substantial buff that can be used to speed up the fight by a good bit, and that is basically the best time to charge that ability up. Tied to that is that you should be sending Limbo to the rift before you swap to your operator. This will allow him to continue to generate energy while you're attacking the Eidolon's shields, which means you should be getting maybe 50 to 100 energy back every time you swap between your operator and warframe phases, especially if you're using something like an energy siphon. And there's another use for operator mode than just dealing with the boss's shield phase. Certain attacks, specifically the weak little laser rain thing caused by all Eidolons after they fire into the air, and far more noticeably the Hydralis extremely painful acid ball rain thing, can actually hit you while you're in the rift, and in that last case kill you in like 5 seconds even if you have full health and energy. You should be able to bypass everything else with the rift, including the Gonchulus annoying shield, but keep an eye out for those 2 attacks, and if you absolutely need to, swap to your operator in stealth so that you can survive them. And the final thing I have to say is that, just like with the Prophet Taker, for Eidolon hunts, the Rolling Guard mod is quite nice. It helps a bit to combat those rift ignoring attacks, and it can also be used to give you a little bit of extra durability during other parts of the battle, and since currently Rolling Guard only costs like 10 to 30 plat on the market, if you can afford to, you should probably try and get this mod and toss it into your Eidolon hunting build. It's certainly not a perfect defense by any means, and you will want to add some more mods to go with it, but Rolling Guard will help you out quite a bit. And that's all I have to say about the Plains of Eidolon and its 3 special bosses. Limbo's certainly not the best when doing the hunts, but he can handle them just fine, and otherwise he's basically perfect for all of the events on the plains themselves, and can deal with them in any way he feels like. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you later. Farewell.